But the nutrients from the plant, fruit and herb world are so beneficial to the human organism.
Yeah.
Can you think of any nutrients from the plant world that would be beneficial in
Not at
addition
all.
to... No, me neither.
He mentions what's called a plaque test. Plaque is not measuring plaque. That's actually just the name for phospholipase associated 2, which is just a protein which is there to degrade oxidized LDL in particular.
It served a good purpose,
Yeah.
but it's time to start incorporating good things back in the diet, fruits, vegetables, little bits of carbs.
Yeah, that's it, yeah.
Get the diversity of the gut up, bring
Yeah.
some health, bring some fibre, bring some nutrition back in.
Yeah.
They are lovely blokes and very well meaning, but the problem is it's all well and good knowing what a marker is, but it's interpretation of the results which is really lacking here, or joined up thinking.
Today, I've been on the carnivore diet for 3 months. I've eaten nothing but steak, eggs, salmon, bacon, cheese, milk. Basically anything meat and dairy, I have eaten. It has been an amazing diet. I feel absolutely incredible. And I say that with sincerity. I just feel amazing. It's one of the best diets I've done by a linear mile.
Hit me up. What's this carnivore diet done to me?
Well, okay, so the big thing is, and I said I'm not going to just blame the carnivore diet, but in your case, what I am seeing is very high levels of triglycerides. They're probably the highest that I've seen on you. Okay, so those are just a lot of blood fats within the bloodstream.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that also can then correlate to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which I've also calculated using a few other markers as well. Which most people have got that, but your levels are quite high because it's also related to your body mass index, your waist circumference, and then also triglycerides and something called GGT. So you've definitely got that. So triglyceride levels are literally off the chart. Also, your markers this time is much more cardiovascular dominated. Okay, so
it's hindered my cardiovascular.
Yeah, you're moving back towards sort of having cardiovascular issues. So I'm already starting to see plaque build up.
Okay,
by
that's
using,
not good.
Yeah, and the reason why that's occurring as well, because cholesterol only becomes problematic if there's a lot of LDL particles within the bloodstream, which is a bit like having lots of cars on the motorway, and they tend to then, there's more likelihood that they can crash into the barriers.
Is that cholesterol?
Yeah, so it's
LDL.
LDL, they deliver cholesterol around the body, okay? They're not necessarily bad, because we need cholesterol everywhere, okay? Every cell in the body can make cholesterol, but the LDL cholesterol, once it starts to become high in numbers, that is much more problem than the amount of cholesterol on each particle.
So he's presenting really well. He's loving the diet. He feels fantastic. Loads of energy, sleep's improved, strength is off the charts, apparently. What do you think so far, Stephen?
Well, it's quite surprising what he's saying, because high triglycerides are not about fat in the diet. It's about a surplus of food and transporting fats around. So we can make fat from non-fat substances. We can make it from carbohydrates, which is what the liver does. It converts carbs into fats. But I'm very interested in the way he talks about low-density lipoproteins. I think he actually says something like, I can see progression of plaques, which is not what that marker is showing at all. Otherwise, people like Nick Norwitz, what they're doing when they eat, 6 packets of Oreos is they're stripping their arteries of plaques. This is just a marker, which, by the way, is not even measured. It's an estimation. He's making a very, very bold claim that it's causing the plaques, and that's just not what that is doing. He talks about particles as well, and particle number is not really that important compared to, say, the type of LDL. If you're going to go down that route of believing that LDL is causal, which, of course, it's never been proven, then you've got to look at oxidized, glycated, oxidized and glycated. You've got to look at big, fluffy, small, dense, and there's no nuance in what's being said. So if you just say LDL is high, well, that's a pejorative term which doesn't really mean much. And also it's not correlated with dying from all causes, because that's what we know. At least 50% of people who die of a heart attack or a heart issue have normal or low LDL cholesterol. It's an absolute terrible marker, but it's certainly not a marker we can use to say you are suddenly building plaques. So I found that quite a strange thing to actually say. Nobody can be that categoric, because there is absolutely no causal evidence to be able to say that.
And bearing in mind, he's only been doing this for 90 days. It would be like taking up smoking for 90 days and them saying, hey, look, what's happening to your arteries? And obviously smoking's bad, but it's not going to happen over 90 days. He's on a lot of dairy, and I'm talking plenty of milk. There are carbs, plenty of carbs still in his diet, and he's taken a horrendous amount of powders, supplements. He's in blue light. He's eating very regularly. There's multiple factors here that isn't just a strict, pure, healthy carnivore diet. We'll watch on anyway and see what they say.
A bit like you could have 100 people on the motorway and you could have maybe just 10 cars, you got 10 in each car, that's not a problem.
Yeah.
Or you got 100 cars. Yeah, that can get more traffic on the roads.
Yes, okay.
So there is markers then, as I said, which indicate that, and one of those markers is LPPLA2. And I've looked at your markers over years. Yeah, I've seen it really high when you were competing, and I've also seen it really low when you were really eating much cleaner.
Yes.
Okay, and now it's starting to creep back up, and that's why. So I've looked at something called apolipoprotein B, and your levels are much higher than they've been in the past. So you've got lots of triglycerides in the bloodstream. You've got lots of LDL particle numbers in there as well, and they are now starting to cause some inflammation in the blood vessel walls. Okay, so it's very early, and it's 100% reversible.
So it's creating a bit of plaque.
Yeah, that's
and
it.
It's causing a bit of damage.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, and you can clean that out. And some of the big things that clean it out are things like vitamin K2, omega-3 fatty acids, vitamin C is really good, and obviously then not putting so much traffic on the road as well. Not eating.
What do you think?
Well, I just find there's no nuance to this whatsoever. He mentions what's called a plaque test, which is the phospholipase A2. Plaque is not measuring plaque. That's actually just the name for phospholipase associated PLAC, AC in the associated 2, which is just a protein, which is a marker, which is actually something there to degrade LDL or oxidized LDL in particular. And I have case studies of this. I actually use it in one of my presentations where the gentleman involved was told exactly what Eddie's being told, that this is a dangerous marker. And I said, well, no, it isn't actually. It's doing its job, because when you start to degrade the oxidized LDL, the phospholipase associated protein A2 starts to increase, because its role is to degrade that oxidized LDL. And we followed that over 6 months, and I've got the data. And we just saw that go up. We saw the oxidized LDL go from a red flag to an amber and then to a green. The problem is, I think he's very wedded to the lipid or diet heart hypotheses, which is what he's constantly referring to. And when you start talking about subfractions or proteins that are associated with low density lipoproteins, such as ApoB and apolipoprotein, and we could even get into LP-little-a, although he's not even mentioned it, we're still talking about the same theory, which hasn't been proven. And if you are going to go into that theory, then you have to look into subfractions, and you have to look into oxidized, you have to look into glycated, you have to look into oxidized glycated, and then get more into the nuance of it. If you believe that theory, the statements are too broad. And also it's quite annoying about this phospholipase A2 associated protein test, because that is a good sign that your body has found some oxidized LDL and it is being degraded. And like I say, I've got case studies that show that, and we've actually tracked that, and that is what it's doing.
Absolutely.
So much. Okay, and also which you've always had for a while, and your ferritin levels, which can also cause some damage to the blood vessels. And that's high in most men, but of course you eat obviously a high meat diet. There's going to be a lot of iron in there.
Very dense in red meat, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that's
So I advise when people when that's high, I recommend personally to give blood on a regular basis.
How's the blood looking? Because I know you look at the shape, the size, the ability to carry oxygen.
Yeah, the red blood cells themselves are absolutely fine. There's no issues there. You make your red blood cells within the bone marrow.
Yeah.
The bone marrow then requires a cocktail of nutrients to do that. The white blood cells are made there as well. And I said the interesting thing then is that when we looked at the stool, your gut health has definitely deteriorated since last time. Okay.
He's sort of quite concerning, Eddie, quite a bit here unnecessarily, because of the context, and it's very kind of tunnel vision, a bit outdated.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, he's talking about the health of his red blood cells, but he hasn't done a reticulocyte count, so we could look at the production. We're doing this live. I did look at this earlier, but also there's a couple of confounders, because he has already acknowledged that he was very dehydrated, because there's a marker that they use, which is albumin. He actually says to Eddie later on, you're very dehydrated. Well, that changes things like the mean corpuscular value and the mean hemoglobin concentration, but he's looking at things that are in the stool which are leaving. So Akkermansia is a sort of bacteria which he is claiming it's zero. Well, yeah, it could be zero in that particular stool. It could be. That sort of testing isn't 100%. I've done those tests, by the way, as a carnivore, 6-year carnivore, and mine always comes back as ideal composition. And he's making a broad claim there that it's tanking. And the reason for that is that degrades a mucus layer in the colon. And because it degrades it, because it chews it up, it then rebuilds it. Well, when you have that bacteria absent, other bacteria comes in to do the job. And this is the great thing about gut bacteria or the gut microbiome. It's about what dies off and what survives. So that particular bacteria seems to enjoy a high carb, high insulin state. It's died off. Okay, so it's zero. There will be a bacteria that rises to take its place and can do that as well. And also, we don't know for a fact, because it's still in its infancy when we talk about alpha diversity, that degrading and rebuilding actually is a good thing. We don't know that is a good thing. You could be saying it's a bacteria that's doing something, and then the body's smart and saying, oh, stop doing that, we're going to rebuild the mucus. Nobody knows that. There is no clinical evidence to actually prove that that is a good thing that will maintain the gut bacteria barrier. And going to clinical experience, and this is the big thing people talk about, evidence-based against clinical experience. Well, evidence-based is what he's doing. He's looking at numbers and making assumptions, completely ignoring clinical experience, which is what Eddie is saying how he feels. And that is really critical. Eddie, I think, said at the beginning, he's never felt so good. It's been the best thing he's done for ages. So maybe we don't need that bacteria chewing away that mucus layer. Maybe we need a different type.
And I don't think that's coincidental.
Is that because there's not as much diversity with the diet, fruit and veg?
Yeah, and because they supply substances to certain what are known as commensal bacteria to produce short-chain fatty acids, which help to maintain the gut barrier wall. So I'm starting to see more inflammation in your sort of gut.
So he doesn't know that we do also get short-chain fatty acids from animal proteins. That's obviously, we know that as a fact.
In the large intestine, and I'm also seeing more sort of bile acid production, which is what you'd expect if you're eating a lot of meat, because you need the biles to emulsify fats as well. But in the gut barrier lining, there's a lot of activity going on with something known as the secretory immunoglobulin A and beta defensins 2. And because they're reacting, and not just that might have just been coincidental, by the way, but I just don't think so.
Yeah, okay. So it's attacking the liver, it's attacking the gut.
It's just it's making your liver more. Your liver has definitely become more inflamed. But not just inflamed as well, but also a much higher level of fatty liver disease.
More at risk.
But really easy to reverse. The good thing was that all your hormones were really fine, apart from thyroid was starting to become a bit more diminished. So
which helps the metabolism and
that's it. So you're not.
These are incredible claims about the non-alcoholic fatty liver. When his GGT, which is one of 4 key enzymes coming from the liver, is really low. I think it's something like 20. And I've seen people where it's been really inflamed and it's in triple figures. Firstly, that reading doesn't show that anyway. Secondly, that reading in isolation doesn't actually do it, because you need ALT, AST, ALP, and GGT. And then you get different patterns depending on the levels. And you can see whether someone has non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, cirrhosis. You can tell whether they've got hepatitis, whether they've got a healthy liver. GGT at 20 is just not high. So that's a terrible thing to say. Then he talks about the thyroid, and this is an absolute common misconception that is just everywhere, and it's a ridiculous thing. T3 is absolutely essential to move pyruvate across the mitochondrial membrane. It is not needed when you're on a carnivore diet to anywhere near the level, because we don't rely on glycolysis. We don't rely on the movement of pyruvate into the mitochondrial membrane. So we're going to have lower levels of T3. Again, I have watched this earlier, and later he says, well, your TSH, your thyroid stimulating hormone, looks pretty good. That's the negative feedback loop, or the feedback loop, to say to your body, is everything all right with your thyroid levels? Now, I know sometimes that can be misleading, but in this case, we understand why the T3 has gone down slightly. Eddie did not say, I'm feeling fatigued, I have unexplained weight gain or unexplained weight loss, I'm hot too much, I'm cold too much. There's no symptoms. You cannot say that there is a thyroid problem just because T3 is lower. And again, I have case study after case study where the people are coming to me and saying, I keep being told it's subclinical, my thyroid is subclinical. And we go through all the numbers and we go through all the symptoms, and they're not. They're putting the cart before the horse. It's not about the numbers, it's about the person. And we've got to get away from this ridiculous talking about normative ranges like they're the things that we need to do. If I had 100 people in this room right now, I took them from the shopping centre, how many would be optimally? Maybe 7 out of 100?
Maybe.
Right. Well, those 7 aren't the people that are giving blood. It's the rest.
Yeah.
So we're using the ranges from sick, fat people, overweight people, and we are using ranges where they're eating 45 to 65% carbohydrates. They are ridiculous ranges to even, aspire to be honest. The carnivore way of living gives you different numbers. And it's obvious that it would, because you're giving the body a different environment and you're not running on glycolysis and you're looking at beta oxidation. There's so many things that are wrong with this stupid rumor about, my T3 has tanked. I must be having a terrible thyroid. Look at Eddie. Listen to what he said. He is not presenting with symptoms at all for thyroid.
Yeah, the nuance and the context is very important here, definitely.
Yeah.
Not making so much T3, tritethionine, T4 to T3 conversion. That can also be dependent on glucose. But as I said, you do make a certain amount of glucose anyway, but you're much easier. Why make it when you can eat it?
Yeah.
I think it's served its purpose.
Yeah, I can't get my head around that whatsoever. I mean, it's there for a reason.
Breaking down carbohydrates and glycolysis takes a lot of steps. So this is a ridiculous argument that the body is going to have a big stress with gluconeogenesis. When we're asleep, that's what the liver does. It makes sure that we have enough blood glucose to make sure we sleep through the night. It's such a ridiculous argument, and I've heard this before. If you take out gluconeogenesis, you replace it with another process, which is really, really energy intensive, which we all know. When you use glycolysis, it's not as good as beta oxidation. You get much less ATP for your buck than with your fat burn. I hate fat burning, but people use the term fat burning, so we'll use it in this instance. What you're doing is you're saying, this really expensive, terrible system, why use it? We've got a better one, taking carbs in. But hang on a minute, that also needs a terribly long, convoluted system that's very energy inefficient. So,
and I think you're ready to just slowly introduce back these really beneficial types of disease-preventing foods and gut microbiome sort of optimization foods.
Okay. Hormones?
Yeah, I mean, testosterone was really good. Your estradiol levels had gone up slightly, but still well within the optimum ratios. Growth hormone levels were also still pretty good. Like from a hormonal perspective, because you can look at the bloods and the stool and you can see, can they build muscle, or are they so depleted in nutrients and hormones, no matter how hard they train, they are non-responders. And that's obviously, it's not the case with you.
It's not the case on the carnivore diet, but it's certainly not the case in Eddie's case, is it?
And they are really nice guys, and I hate saying it, but they're not the best example of an athletic physique. And when we're talking about health promoting foods and then talk about hormones, well, hormones are not made out of carbohydrates. They're certainly not made out of sugar. They're made out of fats. And they're made out of amino acids. So I think that's a bit of a stretch what he's saying there.
Opinion, it served a good purpose.
Yeah.
But it's time to start incorporating good things back in the diet, fruits, vegetables, little bits of carbs.
Yeah, that's it, yeah.
Get the diversity of the gut up, bring some health, bring some fibre, bring some nutrition back into the diet.
That's the bit I can't get my head around. Bring some nutrition back into the diet. I mean, if you think about the moment you add any plant food, you have anti-nutrients, so it's going to deplete nutrients. You have fibre, which is going to deplete nutrients. You have sugar, which can deplete vitamin C, etc., and get in the way of other pathways, maximising their optimal function. It just doesn't make any sense. And obviously, they're still under the impression that they're getting all these antioxidants from plants, which they're pro-oxidants. He's under the impression that we're trying to achieve diversity in the gut because that's a healthy, happy gut. But I'm pretty sure that all of us carnivores, we're pretty healthy and happy down there. I mean, we don't have any kind of bloatedness. We don't have the gas. We don't have the griping. But it's frustrating, isn't it, really?
It is, and especially when 150 biomarkers or however many bloods they've looked at are all looking at things that are made out of protein or fats.
Yeah. Well, all these nutritious foods. I mean, if you want nutrients, just eat fatty red meat. There's all of them in there, That's all we need.
Diet.
Yeah.
And I kind of agree, and this is what I talked about this morning, is just think, for sustainability more than anything, because just eating meat and eggs and dairy is pretty boring.
Yeah.
So putting a bit of fruit in, a bit of vegetables, it just helps me, and now you're skinny, a bit of carbs, get that diversity of the gut up.
Yeah.
So it does help me a bit. Maybe I can incorporate that.
And one other thing on that as well is that once you're on this low carb diet, and this is something I missed out, as I said, I've written a book on the ketogenic diet, I didn't get this part, is that you become much more glucocorticoid dominant, meaning cortisol plays a much bigger part on breaking down tissues. And that's what I missed. And you don't want that.
It's a stress, basically.
I mean, there's periods of time you can have it, but if it's constant, you end up becoming skinny fat, as I say, and that's what happens.
Like Brian Shaw.
Yeah.
Skinny fat. Right, well,
Again, it's a bit of a claim to make, but I myself, I eat enough protein in one bolus. I'm not in nutritional ketosis all around the clock. I go in and out, and that's very natural.
Yeah, I think firstly, cortisol has a role in the body. Absolutely, it's nailed on. It's not a stress hormone. It does activate when there is stress, but it also regulates many things, many functions. Every single salivary cortisol test I've ever done on a carnivore has come back fantastic. And again, I can prove that. I've got 1,000 clients, loads of reviews, case studies, those sort of things. I tell you what is stressy is later on they recommend 200 grams of carbohydrates, which is 50 times the amount the body wants. Now that's a stress. As soon as you exceed the teaspoon of sugar that's needed in your blood, wow, what a huge response you're going to get from insulin. Now that's a stress. Insulin isn't a stress hormone either, but it's a stressful situation. And that's the analogy I'm trying to draw here. The alarm bells ring straight away because that is an excessive amount of blood glucose to suddenly go to. And you're putting 200 grams of carbs in when you need about 5 grams over an hour's period, let's say. So the body is pretty well versed to take that blood glucose and look at it and think, well, this is way too much. So we need a lot of insulin, and then you get the infamous spike. Well, if you're going to do that 3 or 4 times a day, wow, that's 3 or 4 times a day you're stressing your body with a huge amount of insulin. Now, what happens? Well, you get a biphasic response from the pancreas. So you get the granular response, then you also get the second response. You also get the incretin hormone response once it's actually in your small intestine from the brush border, when it's like, wow, there's loads of sugar still. We need to deal with it. So you get these huge responses. Now, when you're eating a processed carbohydrate in particular, or something that is very, very sugary, an apple, a banana in particular is really bad. I did my live CGM test the other day, and it just spiked my blood glucose incredibly quickly. Well, what's happening is you've got the stress in the body. It brings down the blood sugar to a point which is actually too low and takes you hypoglycemic. Then you need cortisol, you need glucagon to bring up the blood sugar because the insulin's been so effective. And that's what they're actually advocating, to do this 3 times a day, 24/7 for 365 days a year, 1,000 times over a year. An incredibly stressful situation for your body to deal with in a nutritional sense. Absolutely crazy. It's just not joined up thinking at all. It's just not.
Thank you, Phil.
Yeah.
Really appreciate you coming, mate. In general, it's not done me too much damage. I'm pretty healthy.
Yeah.
And I feel great.
Yeah.
But in your opinion, I think if I stayed on this for a year or two, it's going to start having some adverse effects.
Without a doubt.
Okay.
Yeah, in my opinion.
And that's what I kind of, in my head, that's what I kind of thought anyway. I've spoken to a lot of people, and people are around the world are absolutely thriving on this diet, and there are people that abide by it and eat nothing but meat and eggs and dairy, and it works for them. And if you feel good, and if you you're healthy, as long as you're checking your bloods and you're staying within the ranges, carry.
You see, he kind of went back on himself there. As long as he was going to say something like, as long as you feel good, you present good, you sleep in, your energy's up. This is true of Eddie right now. He's loving his life. It's all working. And he's allowing this influence of the mainstream message to kind of override his autonomy, which just is crazy. It's really quite sad to watch in many ways, because you think, like, I'm really happy Eddie gave it a good go. 90 days, all very much respect to you. But it's a shame about all the supplements. It's a shame about excessive dairy. And it's a shame about working with someone who obviously doesn't understand the nuance and the context of coming from a carnivore diet. We're not trying to aim for arbitrary figures. Why would we want to aim for that? That's not what anybody's goal should be.
Yeah, it started so well, and then it ended with stay within the ranges. Well, if your ranges are not about optimal health, you don't want to stay in the ranges. You want the levels that are appropriate for you, for your way of living, that are actually the correct thing. You don't want to be chasing numbers at all. The biomarkers, the bloods, I mean, like I say, I've been doing this for a long time, and they are interesting, but they're not the be all and end all. I have people with fantastic bloods when you look at the normative ranges who feel like the world's worst person. They have terrible things. A lot of people have been to doctors and been told there's nothing wrong with you. And they say, yeah, but I've got loads of pain, or I've got this, I've got that. So you can't say to someone there's nothing wrong with you when there is, but you also can't say you're perfectly fine, but your bloods are telling you there's something wrong. yes, there are some bloods where we can get some sort of heads up on what's happening, but it's understanding it. Again, if you look at your blood glucose, I don't know if you're going to play the rest of it, Lee. I really would appreciate some of the other bits where they talk about, things like resistant starch and stuff.
Yeah.
But if you are eating something that's doing you lots of favors, that's really great. If you look at your blood glucose and it's in range, you might think, well, that's fine. Well, how much insulin is required to do that? That's the other thing. So if we started to look at fasted insulin and that was going up, or C-peptide, which these guys do understand actually, that is a good use of bloods, because we are seeing, all right, okay, your surface is good. So the continual glucose monitor, which incidentally isn't a fructose monitor, it's a glucose monitor. If that's in range, you could be thinking, well, I'm rocking and rolling, but how much insulin is needed to make that normative range perfect, and how big is the spike? So I think it's one of those things, a spike in insulin I'm talking about. Let's say, just for the sums, nice and easy, 100 milligrams per deciliter of blood glucose, that's your average over the day. Was that 150 drop into 50, up to 150 drop into 50, or was it 105.95, 105.95? Two completely different profiles, two completely different ways of eating, and you'll have two completely different outcomes.
Yeah.
I think if things start to go in the wrong direction, which I feel like they are a little bit, I think you've got to adjust, and that's exactly what I'm doing. So a little bit of fruit, a little bit of veg, and I'm going to start incorporating a little bit of carbs. You reckon carbs in the evening?
You can do a bit of both, but mainly in the evening. And as I said, the tip of the day, which you've been doing anyway, is to eat those carbs lost in that meal.
Yes. Okay.
So that's also a big. And things like the gluten-free rice and grains are really good. And also, I love boiled potatoes because they are one of the highest foods in resistant starch. I couldn't advocate like 100% carnivore diet. Even with obese people, it would have to be definitely low carb. I've got no problem with that. But the nutrients from the plant, fruit and herb world are so beneficial to the human organism.
Yeah.
Can you think of any nutrients from the plant world that would be beneficial in
not at
addition
all.
to? No, me neither. I would love to know.
No.
I'd love to have him write down a list of these nutrients so that we could kind of say, well, what about that? Well, I mean, we get that already, or that's in the wrong form, or that's a pro-oxidant, and that's not a good thing.
I mean, resistant starch. Firstly, the name should worry you. Okay. It resists digestion in the small intestine, all right? And then it's fermented by bacteria in the large intestine, but you still get RS1, which is physically inaccessible, RS2, which is sort of like a granular starch. You've got RS3, RS4, which is chemically modified. What resistant starch are we talking about? Retrograded starch, which is RS3. It's resistant to digestion, right? If someone said, I'm having this steak, but it's been chemically modified to be resistant to my digestive system, people would think that was ridiculous. This is one of the most stupid things. I mean, boiled potatoes it's just starch. It's long chains of glucose, which will be broken down into sugar. And why is that beneficial? What is that? What is it you're getting? That's the plant's energy store. That's what it is. There's nothing in there. It's great at growing potatoes. And I think, what we get from animals makes good animals, and what you get from plants makes good plants. That's it. It's really that simple. It's really, really that simple.
Agree.